How does PWC take your company to the leading edge? They bring the sharpest minds in tech to your team, so you can bring the ideas that will transform your business. They're passionate about your industry, so you can walk into any room with every advantage. And they're with you every step of the way, so you can know you're headed in the right direction. PWC builds for what's next, so you can get there now. Get started at pwc.com/US/leading edge.
Most of all, thank you to the great grassroots Conservatives who work and unite here today. And welcome to my hometown of Calgary.
The Conservative Party of Canada held their convention over the weekend in Calgary, and party leader Pierre Poilievre passed his leadership review with flying colors. 87.4% of delegates voted to keep him as their leader rather than have another leadership race. Hello and welcome to the Full Comment Podcast. I'm Brian Lilley, your host, and I too spent the weekend in Calgary talking with delegates, talking with backroom operatives, MPs, candidates, and Conservative supporters, along with many, many fans of Full Comment. Thank you. Keep listening. It was an interesting event and one that showed a party more confident and buoyant than outsiders might think. The people I was speaking with were excited about their party, excited about their leader, looking to the future, with many expecting a spring election. In this episode, you're going to hear from Calgary MP Michelle Rempel-Garner, MP Jamil Jivani from the GTA, Conservative campaign manager Steve Outhouse, party whip and Grand Prairie MP Chris Warkentin, and longtime operative, staffer, pundit, and candidate Gary Keller. On Friday night, just before voting began on whether Poilievre should stay or go, he opened his speech meant to rally the troops with some humor.
I love seeing so many Conservatives in one place, but it must freak the Liberals out enough to invoke the Emergencies Act.
Poilievre's speech focused on issues that he feels matter to his voters: affordability, housing, dealing with the fentanyl crisis. It wasn't a speech all about Donald Trump and the evil Americans. Instead, it was a solid speech that policy-wise didn't break new ground, but there was one section where he revealed something he hasn't really talked about much. While discussing what motivates him, what keeps him going, he mentioned his autistic daughter, Valentina. Poilievre and his wife, Anna, have been fairly guarded in what they have to say about Valentina, letting out bits and pieces, but being private about what can be a difficult topic to discuss. Valentina has been nonverbal. On Friday night, Poilievre got emotional speaking about that and a recent change.
Hope. That's really the theme of this convention and this evening. Hope is on the way for our people as well. But hope is not just a comforting blanket. Hope is the knowledge that your work will fulfill your purpose, your why. He who has a why can bear any how, Viktor Frankl wrote in the great book, Man's Search for Meaning. That thing that you call meaning could be for you a home, a career, a family, a business. Seeing your autistic daughter speak for the first time is the thing. It's the thing.
It was one of a few emotional and personal moments for Poilievre, who also spoke up against anti-Semitism and against Alberta separation. He spoke about hope and bringing hope to the many Canadians who have lost it. And he also explained why he wanted to keep fighting for Canada and the future.
Because the unsung heroes who built and protect this country, who have it infinitely harder than I do, they never give up. So I have no right to give up. Because all of you who pound signs on frozen ground, knock doors on dark nights, and sacrifice warm family dinners for cold campaign pizza, you never give up, so I'll never give up.
And with that, members were off to vote. Broadcasting at the conference with other MPs across the Conservative Party's various channels was Michelle Rempel-Garner, who took some time to unpack the convention and the result with me.
Notorious MRG. Do you like that nickname?
Yeah, I've heard it from a few people now. Thanks, Lilley. Jeez.
Okay, so this place is still buzzing. The day after the vote, 87.4%. But now looking forward, election prep, convincing Canadians you got the right plan. Big job.
It is. And I think the tension in the next few weeks as the Liberals, I think they're pre-positioning for a snap election. But there's going to be a lot of tension where they I think they want us to move away from questions of affordability, of crime, immigration, the bread and butter issues that are still affecting Canadians. Now, we know that part of that is, some of the questions on sovereignty, on strengthening Canada's competitiveness. There's other issues too, military, pipelines, energy sector. But the thing is like we have proposals and plans for all of these things. I think what they're going to want us to move away from is like the fact that they don't have that. So for us, it's going to be both holding them to account on some of their lack of plans, lack of action, while also getting our message out, and in a very short order, I think.
Even where you are, not your riding specifically, but Alberta, beef is a big issue. That wasn't addressed in Carney's China deal. Where you're originally from in Manitoba, pork is huge. We've heard from Premier Canoa about that. That wasn't addressed. So there are areas that still need to be addressed. He can't just say mission accomplished.
No, and the list goes far longer than that too. One of my close friends is Claire Rattay. She's the MLA for Skeena, and she's talking about forestry and how there's been no action on forestry and how much that's affected her community.
Tariffs are now up to about 45% effective?
Exactly, and then you start looking at some of the domestic policy issues that are causing food inflation to be the highest in the G7. You and I could yak for an hour on these things, but for us, I think it is going to be continuing to talk to show that there is not a plan there from the Liberal government. There's significant consequences for that, but then also showing some hope for Canadians in the path forward that we've developed, which we've already started to roll out this fall. I mean, I've put forward dozens of concrete reforms for the immigration system. A lot of my colleagues with different policy portfolio responsibilities have been doing the same. And I think, like to your point when we started talking, what happened last night was such a resounding outcome for Pierre is that it's like, yep, okay, unified, onwards, let's go. And I do feel like the energy shifted last night in a really good way. Like it was, okay, we're through this. Let's now we're going into election readiness, whenever that might be.
So I want to talk to you about immigration specifically in a moment because you are the critic on that file, but the message last night was clear. It was unequivocal about hope. Now, I heard a lot of people say during the campaign, Pierre Poilievre's always negative. My reaction was, I don't think you're listening, but that was their perception, and perception in politics becomes reality. No one can listen to that speech and say hope wasn't at the center of it. How important is that pivot at this point?
Well, of course people want hope. It's one of the things you need to get by in your daily life as a human, right? But I think saying, okay, here's why you should be hopeful doesn't mean that we can't talk about the problems that people are facing. And I think some of the challenge, some of the division you've seen in the country and frustration in Canada right now is because there are literally millions of people who feel like they haven't had their concerns heard. So giving voice to issues and then saying, okay, well, here's how we're going to solve them. To me, like the hope has two sides of that coin. It's saying, I see you and I hear you. I hear that you're struggling. Here's how I'm going to fix it. And for the Liberals, the contrast from Pierre's speech last night, which I think had both sides of that coin, the Liberals have just said, here's some vibes, right? And I know that matters.
Here's a check to pay for your groceries, which didn't used to be unaffordable, but are now.
Well, and that was like, it's a rewarmed policy from several years ago. Instead of, and in the meantime, when like the grocery prices have continued to increase, I was in a major Canadian low-cost grocery chain, low-cost in quotation marks, and a can of basic coffee was $33 this week. Oh my God! I digress. The point is that we're out of time in this country on a lot of issues, and I think that the urgency for us is to show people that we get that, we hear that, and that in Parliament, as Parliament sits, hold the government to account for the big grand promises that they've made while showing alternative solutions as a government in waiting to fix those problems. That's what we're going to do. I mean, I'm ready to get on the plane tomorrow morning, get back into the House, and continue on not just only with my immigration portfolio responsibilities, but also to be a strong voice for Alberta in the middle of a challenging time where there are people who have questions about Canada and the Liberal government's performance in our province. So anyway, a lot of work to do.
I saw the Ipsos poll saying 28% in Alberta support independence. I think it's probably higher, with all due respect to my friend Daryl Bricker. I think it's higher, and comments calling people traitors don't help. I think, David Eby and others are driving people into the camp, saying, well, see, they don't like us anyway. How big of a concern is it for you? What do you hear when you're on home turf like you are now?
This is no surprise to me. I wrote a fairly spicy document. It'll be its 6-year anniversary, actually, in February, called the Buffalo Declaration.
I remember it.
So I read through it a couple of weeks ago, and it was so prescient. I think in hindsight, if the pandemic hadn't happened exactly when I put it out, there would have been more discussion. But this isn't something that's new. Like, this has been simmering for years now, since the impacts of a decade of disastrous Liberal policies have fundamentally shifted the ability for Albertans to participate in many areas of the economy. And so for me, as an Alberta MP, two things. Like, I run as a Conservative because, as Pierre said in his speech last night, I mean, it's something I've always said, you don't see national unity crises under a Conservative government. I sat in Stephen Harper's cabinet, and I can tell you, the goal was to, if there was regional issues or regional tensions, was to solve it. And if there was a policy where you couldn't fix that, it was, okay, well, do we really need this? Is this in the best interest of the country? It's the opposite with the Liberals. That's number one. And number two, I'm not going to shy away from talking about the concerns, valid concerns that people are bringing up about fairness and equality. I'm an Albertan too. I care about these things. And for me, a lot of these questions on sovereignty, it's like, well, ask Mark Carney about this. Does he think these concerns are valid? Are you just going to dismiss what's happening here? And I think if he does, that's really irresponsible. So,
I worry that if they do call a snap election and get a majority, that it will fuel the independence movement in Alberta.
Well, I think that we have a very good chance. I know everybody, the liberal industrial doom spiral complex that is the, leftist media in Canada are going to try and paint this narrative that we're not competitive. But that's not what polling
shows you are. Let's talk on an issue where you guys are hitting a nerve, I think. And I know you got to go get a sandwich. Everyone's got to eat. So let's talk about immigration, though. It's an issue that the Liberals refused to say for a long time was an issue. They wanted to deny it as numbers crept up, as the temporary foreign worker program went out of control. They've reduced on some fronts, but they are still at huge numbers. 400,000 for permanent residents. The asylum claim system, which I know you document well, it's over 300,000 now waiting for a hearing, isn't it?
Yes, and there's something else. I'm so glad you asked this, because I actually wanted to talk to you about it anyways. So the Liberals have set these numbers, which are still really high, making the assumption, or predicated on the assumption, that 2 million plus people that are in Canada on expired or expiring visas are going to leave. So the question becomes like, okay, well, what happens if they all stay? I had something called an order paper question. You're well acquainted with this. For your listeners who aren't, it's this tool where MPs can get data out of the federal government on where all of the asylum claims were coming from, what streams of entry. This was released, the answer to this was released on Monday, and you would be shocked to see the numbers of asylum claims that are coming from foreign student visas that have expired. It is exorbitantly high. And I knew that it was going to be very high, but it was off the charts. And so for me, it's like, okay, well, if you don't have a plan to follow the law, ensure that the law is enforced and people who are here temporarily actually leave, then you can't keep adding millions of people over a 5-year period to Canada when we don't have housing, healthcare, and jobs infrastructure to support that. So, I think that there's a bigger conversation to be had. We're going to be pressing them on removals because that's the law. right?
Would that go over well right now with what's happening in the U.S.? And so many Canadians are obsessed with American news. And they'll say, oh, see, the Conservatives want to bring ICE to Canada.
I don't think one bit that we've done anything close to the sort. And I think, frankly, if people, if the far left want to suggest that questions like saying, like, okay, existing Canadian law says that if you are here on a temporary visa or an expiring visa, you need to leave. Oh, hey, government, how are you going to enforce that? That's my job as an opposition member. And I think people would actually get mad at me for not asking those questions, given that it's not fair for anybody to watch the impacts of too many people too fast in the country.
Number one source that I hear complaints about this from are people who came through the traditional legal channels.
Yes. And that's the thing. It's not fair to anybody. It's not fair to people who are waiting in the queue, playing by the rules. It's not fair to people who came here. I especially think of temporary foreign workers who oftentimes are abused by employers. There was, again, one of these order paper questions that came out this week that showed the actual number of tips to the abuse line that hadn't been litigated or investigated. Shocking. It's not fair to anybody. So in order for there to be a consensus on immigration, it has to be fair and orderly. And I think that's just common sense to get there.
All right, Michelle Rempel, thank you. Good luck in the coming election.
Hey, don't know for sure, but I was the first one to write about it in January. I'm just saying.
Chris Warkentin is the Conservative Party whip, one of Poilievre's close advisors, and someone in charge of keeping MPs in the House of Commons all moving in the same direction. He also believes, looking at the signs, well, the Liberals appear to be planning for that spring election we keep talking about, in case they want one or need one. But he doesn't think Canadians are going to believe Carney's narrative. Importantly, he also points out that the Conservatives have offered to work with the Liberals and, in fact, have already given Carney enough power to start building major projects. He's just not doing it.
Obviously, we have worked with the Liberals to pass legislation that they say that they need to get stuff done. What's startling is just how little Mark Carney has done. He had C5 because he needed that to ensure that he could get big projects done immediately. Then he created this big office, spent $1 million hiring staff, but has done nothing. Like there's just nothing happening. And I think that Canadians are starting to ask the question. Is he actually going to get stuff done that he claimed he was going to get done? He said he'd have a deal with the Americans. He said he'd get big projects built. He said he was going to, he was going to get the budget into some better shape. Obviously, he's broken that promise, but really underperformed on a whole bunch of other things. So I think that, at the end, we have to do our job to actually articulate a clear vision as to how we would get done what we say that will get done. Canadians are going to now demand politicians in the next election actually lay out their plan rather than just believing that, a politician like Mark Carney, because he said he's going to do something, that'll do it.
Well, you're an Alberta MP. The Major Projects Office is close to where we're standing right now. They have had a lot of promises. Carney submitted 2 lists, but even admitted just because he submits a list doesn't mean the project gets approved. So how are you viewing that now? I'm sure you probably thought, okay, good, she's doing something at the start, but how are you viewing it now?
Well, I think what we're seeing is that there's a lot of speeches and there's a lot of, words that he's been, giving, but he's the same old Liberal. He's depending on the, he's leaning on the bureaucracy. He's building a larger and larger bureaucracy, spending more and more money on consultants, and getting the same outcome that Justin Trudeau did, doing the same thing that Justin Trudeau did. So I think that, we are disappointed. We expected that he would do at least some of what he said he was going to do. He said he's going to move at unimaginable speed. We gave him C5. It doesn't require that he set up an office.
And C5 was passed last June.
It's been months now. It didn't require a large project office. It required that he say yes. And as of yet, he hasn't said yes to anything.
And that statement that he made when he set up the Major Projects Office and put forward his list that it still doesn't mean it gets built, that was shocking to me because I thought that if the Prime Minister went to the premiers and said, give me your major projects and we'll review them and then approve them, and then he does, and he says, but it doesn't mean it's approved yet, we're going to study it now. That's not moving at speeds not seen in generations.
Well, and that's not what Bill C-5 allows him to do.
What does Bill C-5 allow him to do?
It allows him and his ministers to approve projects. There's no requirement that there be a large project office. There's no requirement that the bureaucracy signs off on it. It's the ability for the Prime Minister to sign off on projects, him alone. So now he's setting up all of these road, these hurdles, these road bumps, and saying, well, it's not me, it's somebody else. I think what happened was we gave him the tools to get the job done, and it scared him. And it scared him because his ministers, his caucus was saying, we're not gonna stand behind you if you approve certain projects. And so all of a sudden he's now looking for scapegoats. So he's creating these bureaucratic scapegoats that sound like they're positive, but when you actually look at the fine print, they're actually building encumbrances to and limiting what he could have done unilaterally. That's a power that he has. He's not using it. And I think Canadians are going to catch on to that.
All right, thank you.
Awesome.
When we come back, the man with a very tough job, getting the Conservative Party ready for the next election. The party's new campaign manager, Steve Outhouse.
This is Tristan Hopper, the host of Canada Did What?, where we unpack the biggest, weirdest, and wildest political moments in Canadian history you thought you knew and tell you what really happened. Stick around at the end of the episode to hear a sample of one of our favorite episodes. If you don't want to stick around, make sure you subscribe to Canada Did What? Everywhere you get podcasts.
As we discussed on Full Comment last week, a snap election is possible. The Liberals are certainly setting the table for one, which makes Steve Outhouse's job more difficult. He has to get the party ready at a moment's notice to fight an election. They've got the money, having raised a record $48 million last year. But Outhouse just took over in December from former campaign manager and director Jenny Byrne. By the way, Byrne was at the convention. I spoke with her briefly, and she denies the claim that her critics are making that she's still the real boss for the next campaign. She says, look, I'm around if anybody needs advice, but Steve is the one in charge. Here is my conversation with the man in charge, Steve Outhouse.
Morning after the vote, how are you feeling with 87.4%? It's almost 90%.
Yeah, we're feeling fantastic after the vote last night. I mean, to have over 87%. When I got here earlier this week, the mood was very, very positive and very, very upbeat. But you can't read into anecdotal evidence. And so to see the results come out last night was very rewarding. I think it gives a clear mandate. And at this point in time, we can, focus on the election ahead.
So there is a lot of talk about a coming election.
Yeah.
Your job is to be ready. You started in December, I think it was. How are things doing? Does campaign readiness suddenly go from months to a year from now to weeks, perhaps?
Since I started, I guess you said in December, I would love to know the timing, and I'll continue to leave the door open if the Liberals wish to send me a note and just let me know. I can put that into my planner and start working. At the same time, I've said since the beginning, well, look, this could be 3 months or it could be 3 years. So we'll be ready to go this spring if they choose to call an election. I don't think they need to call an election. I think they have the mandate that they need to go ahead and negotiate and get a deal with President Trump. And we haven't really seen that yet take place. However, this is politics, and often people are going to look for partisan interest rather than what's for the good of the country. And I think right now there's a lot of things that would make it attractive for the Liberals to try to call this election.
Well, when I look at the Davos speech, the reaction to it, the speech in Quebec City, very nationalistic, didn't play well in certain parts of Quebec, but nationalistic and historic, and then handing out money and then calling your party obstructionist. Sounds like they're at least setting the table, so if they want to have an election meal, it's ready.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. You've observed politics for quite some time, and you can see that, all the breadcrumbs being put down.
Doesn't mean they will go.
But we have to be ready, and that's exactly the tone that they're setting. And that's why we wanted to make sure that, the leader had written the Prime Minister to say, look, we're ready to get down to business. We're pledging cooperation. We're ready to move from rhetoric to results, as he said. We can help fast track some bills. We can do some things that we might like to do better on bail reform and so on. But hey, a step forward is better than nothing at all. Let's get this done. Let's get it off the books, and move some things forward, help some Canadians and get some results. Let's approve a pipeline, once that application comes in and so on. So there's a lot that we can do to help move these things along, and we're ready to do that. And I think that was a good faith move by the leader, and now it's up to the government. Now it's interesting to see, some Liberal ministers go out and even with that letter in hand still claim obstructionists and, to start to talk about the fine points of committee here and there. Anyway, all we can do is be ready, and we're ready to work for Canadians.
You were successful here in Alberta by getting the United Conservative Party Premier Smith to pivot. You were successful in Newfoundland, and I had started to think the PCs may not win in Newfoundland for who knows how long. It's been a while. What are you looking at in terms of pivot points, connecting, getting that extra bump? Because 40% from the last election, that normally wins you a majority. You're looking for new ways to reach out to low propensity voters? Are you looking to tap into people who are maybe lent their vote to Mark Carney last time and are now saying, well, where are the results? What are you doing?
Yeah, so I won't lay out strategy per se, but I think in fairness,
you're not going to tell us everything.
Yeah, here, I'll email it, and you can put it on all your platforms. It'll be fine. But not getting into specific strategy, but I don't think this is telling anything that would shock people. I mean, obviously, our strength right now is with young voters, which of course is a shift for us as a movement overall, and we're excited about it. So we do have to keep reaching out to more and more younger voters who would be voting for their first time, and finding ways to get them engaged. At the same time, despite having a historic level of support and vote that we got, the last time around, we did lose the support of some older, in particular male voters that decided to park their vote with Carney and the Liberals for the last election.
Folks that traditionally may have voted Conservative.
They are much more traditional Conservative-leaning voters. So it is a both and that we need to continue to engage new voters that are very much aligned and have those top-of-mind concerns that have been the strength of our leader and our party of cost of living, crime, housing being a big one, but then continue to talk to those others that may be a bit more seized with the international scene as well. So we're going to be looking at all that.
I did hear complaints from some of my media colleagues who are seized with the international thing. They didn't talk enough, or Pierre didn't talk enough about Trump. I mean, you got to have a position, but the more you talk about Trump, the more it helps the Liberals. I found the speech talking about the trade issues and the impact on jobs to be quite effective.
Yeah. Well, and what are people looking for? Are they looking for us to just, focus on Trump? Or are they looking to understand where we stand about Canada's place in the world? And to me, having a strong Canada that can actually manufacture things at home. What I'm frustrated about, as a Canadian, is that since COVID hit, there was all this talk about we need to bring back supply chains, we have to do manufacturing here, we have to be independent. The Liberal government has done nothing on that for now over a decade, first through Trudeau, and now this is continuing on with the allegedly new, Canada's new government. And so, of course, when our opponents say, well, you need to pivot and you need to change and you need to do this, what they want us to do, and it's a smart political strategy. Yeah, let's get over to an area where we're polling really well and have you play on our, our field. And it's like, this is one of the issues for sure, and it's an important issue. But just like the Liberals don't want to talk about cost of living and housing. So, this is where a bit of the message battle goes on. So I'm proud of the speech last night. I think it laid out the principles of, Canada's place in the world, and I think that was a right way to go.
Without getting into the weeds and personal rifts, part of your success in Alberta was Conservative unity. The UCP is a infamously factional party, which can be great for people like me, bad for you if you're trying to win. How do you bring about unity? I know there have been some conversations with people that were, felt alienated, or there were trouble between the leader and them in the past, but not all. How do you bring about unity and get everyone saying, all right, here's the mission?
Yeah. Definitely teamwork is an important part of what I like to try to bring to the table of any team that I come to work with or for. And in Alberta, it was very important. And we could talk to our caucus and talk to our people. They were coming out of a leadership race, and there was a lot of people who've been on different sides of things, but they were all working together, and they wanted to win, and they all got together, and we did it. And I think that's an example we can point to here. And I want to help build those relationships wherever I can. I'm looking forward to going to the Nova Scotia PC's AGM next weekend out in Halifax and connecting with a lot of people there. I've had some good discussions with people in the Ontario PCs. And of course, again, in Alberta, and BC's going through their leadership right now, but still kind of touching base with the people there and the party and so on. So yeah, I want to build those relationships up all across the country because we need to have the full Conservative coalition together. And obviously, that worked in Newfoundland right now where are there some differences between the federal party and the provincial PCs? For sure. But they got together, the MPs worked with their candidates, and we saw victory there. And I really hope that we can do that on the national scene.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Brian.
All right. All the best.
Appreciate it.
Gary Keller is a veteran of many political campaigns. He ran in Nipissing-Temiskaming in the last election. For years, he was chief of staff to John Baird, including when Baird was foreign affairs minister. And he's been around commenting on federal politics for more than 20 years. He says bringing Steve Outhouse, fresh off provincial wins in Alberta and Newfoundland, is a smart move. He called it one of the structural changes that need to be made to help the Conservatives win the next election. Keller also said that despite what some critics are saying, Poilievre himself is also making changes in how he approaches things.
I think what you saw the other day, Mr. Poilievre's response to Mr. Carney's Davos speech, I thought it was, the tone was right. It laid out an approach that did recognize where he agreed with Mr. Carney, but laid out where he disagreed without. And it very clearly laid out where you can disagree with policies without being disagreeable. Now, last week in the House of Commons, we've seen Government House Leader Steve McKinnon. He has been off his rocker trying to goad Conservatives, calling them obstructionist, even though Mr. Poilievre and the Conservatives issued a letter and saying, we'll support the government on these key issues, including bail reform. And so while the Liberals are trying to gin up people in the House of Commons and outside, I think Mr. Poilievre and his team are focused on doing the building blocks to create the right conditions to fight the next election. And that includes having candidates in place earlier and organization in place earlier.
You mentioned Steve McKinnon calling the government or the opposition obstructionist. I mean, they were blaming the Conservatives for the bail reform bill not being voted on. They had not called it to committee that they control. So to me, when you look at the Davos speech, the reaction to the Davos speech, which Carney knew would come, you look at the expanded GST rebate, you look at the language of obstructions, it does feel like, I'm not saying they will go to an early election, but it feels like they're setting the groundwork so that if they need to, if they want to, they can. Are you reading it that way?
Somewhat I'm reading that way. I think there are people within the Liberal Party apparatus and perhaps even in the caucus and in the cabinet who would like to go to an election sooner rather than later. I'm not convinced that Mark Carney himself wants to go to election. Look, I don't think he loves campaigning. He's not a natural campaigner. I don't think he loved the last 36 days of the campaign. And, there were a lot of smart people around him who said, don't worry, Mr. Carney, you're going to get your 185, 190 seats. You're going to get your majority. And what happened? He didn't get it. So I think he looks back at that and says, okay, smart guys, you said I was going to get my majority. I didn't. What's to say that if you say I'm going to get it now, we don't get the same result? And so I think he himself might be the voice of reason within the Liberal Party but clearly to your point, Steve McKinnon and others are, ramping up the rhetoric. It's up to 11 out of 10.
How does Pierre Poilievre, how does the party deal with Donald Trump? Because the reaction to that Davos speech, look, I'm in the minority. I did not think it was a great speech because of the policy undertones and what I knew would come later. So I was not a fan. But a lot of Canadians rallied to it, and a lot of Canadians rallying to their leader, their prime minister, because of what is going on with Donald Trump and the Americans. As opposition leader, how does Poilievre respond?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I didn't agree with everything in the Davos speech, but I did agree with the general overtones that the world has changed and that Canada needs to reflect that change. Now, what is unsaid in that speech, obviously, is who was in power for the last 10 years, who didn't do the heavy lifting to lay the groundwork in case of a threat? Well, it was the Liberal Party. It was the same group of people that are around Mr. Carney that were around Mr. Trudeau at the same time. So I do think, though, that Canadians as a whole are generally opposed to Donald Trump's agenda, and trying to be evasive or trying to skirt around that issue it's a non-winner. And I think Mr. Poilievre recently has put out some very clear statements about where he disagrees with the president and the president's agenda, and I think we need to do that without being ramping up the rhetoric that is over the top or not founded in reality.
Thanks so much, Gary.
Great to be with you.
And Jamil Jivani is one of the new crop of MPs bringing a different energy to the Conservative Party. He's made news recently with his announced plan to head to Washington and see his law school buddy and close friend, J.D. Vance, the current American vice president. We talked about that, about his campaign to restore the North, the struggles facing young men in Canada, and more.
Okay, almost 90%. How does it feel?
I'm glad he hit the mark, and now we can, focus on winning the next election. That's what I'm looking forward to.
I was talking with one person who said, I expected him to get 81, 82, listened to the speech, said, didn't move me because I've heard it so much. But then they're in-line voting and listening to everyone around them and felt like the speech probably pushed them up to that level. What was your thought on the speech?
I think the speech reminded people of how much Pierre has modernized our party and brought us to a point where we are talking about people and experiences we didn't talk about very often before. Working class Canadians, young people. I mean, you saw on that stage he was surrounded by Zoomers. And I think it's just a reminder of how much we've changed in a positive way, how much we've grown our coalition. And it affirmed that Pierre's brought us to a good point, and we've just got to keep fighting instead of turning back.
So you're looking forward now instead of backward at the last election, potentially spring election, if not a fall. Are you ready personally? Is the party ready?
Yeah, I don't want an election anytime soon. The reason being that I think Canadians are tired. I don't think Canadians want an election right now.
But wouldn't a lot of your supporters want you to bring down the government? Because that's what I always hear. Why won't the Conservatives defeat the government? A lot of people don't understand how the system works and that you need the other parties. But I'm sure you hear from folks, take down the Carney government, we need rid of them now. Why wouldn't you want to do that?
Well, the why we bring them down is what matters. So if we're presented with a real issue that is a fork in the road for our country and we bring them down for that reason, I'd be proud of that. I don't want to be out there, bringing them down just for the sake of bringing them down. I believe most Canadians want to see results, and we've got to get to a point where we've got a plan for the country, and we've got a lot to deal with in the House. We haven't been to work very much in Parliament in a long time, and I'd like to see us get to work, and from there figure out when a good election time is.
I know that you've talked about going down to Washington. You've offered the Prime Minister help, go and see your longtime friend, J.D. Vance, the Vice President. When I asked Pierre about that in December, I said, are you okay with this? Because we hadn't heard from him. There were questions of, would the leader of the Conservative Party be good with it? And he said, I'm absolutely fine if it helps the country. But the Carney government hasn't taken you up on it. So are you just going to go down?
I am going to go down. I am going to affirm that I stand in solidarity with our government. I want us to have a strong position with the United States. I think CUSMA is very important for our country. And I want Mark Carney to be successful in negotiating a good trade deal for Canada. I hope he takes me up on my offer for us to work together, because I don't think this is a partisan issue. But if he wants to make it a partisan issue, that's up to him. I hope he doesn't view it that way. And that's my message to Mark Carney. And that will be my message to the United States and the people I talk to down in Washington. This is a federal to federal issue. I want our federal government to be talking to their federal government. I don't want the actions of provincial politicians to be derailing things like what happened in the fall.
In terms of CUSMA, you represent a riding in the Durham region. I'm sure that you've got constituents who are affected by the layoff at GM, 1,200 jobs gone. If this isn't fixed, there'll be more jobs gone at that plant.
Yeah, and that's what I want more people who are in politics or observing politics to understand. Real jobs and are on the line here. People's lives are getting worse as the CUSMA deal takes longer and longer to be renegotiated. And we can't play games with people's lives. Like, that's what's happening right now, it feels like. People want to posture around, are you anti-American enough? Are you too anti-American? For me, it's just like, let's get a deal done. It's what our country needs, and it's time to get to work.
Well, that's what I hear too often is, we shouldn't have a deal with him
Who needs to deal with him? And in my view, you can only have that if you are very comfortable, very well off. Maybe if you're retired and don't have to worry about work, but working Canadians need jobs that will often rely on the United States.
Yeah, there's political fantasy out there that seems to think that China and a deal with China is going to help make up the gap here. It's not. We need to work with the United States, not just for economic reasons, but also for security reasons. This is a reality of our geographic location. It's a reality of our economy. And if we want to put our own people first, we need to work with the Americans.
On another matter, you're doing a couple of things. You're doing Restore the North, and you and Shuv Majumdar have been talking about liberal racism.
Yes.
Fill me in on those two efforts, or are they part of the same? And why you're taking those messages across the country, because I find them both fascinating.
Well, Restore the North is about bringing the voices of young Canadians to the forefront of the issues that they are caring about: jobs, mental health, immigration. These are priorities we hear on campuses all around the country. Stopping liberal racism, a lot of young people see that as a barrier to them getting a fair chance in the economy, because it has now become normal for the federal government and through the industries it regulates to hire people and fire people on the basis of their skin color. I grew up, I'm 38, not that old, but I grew up at a time where that was considered racism, and I believe it's still racism, and I don't really care what the Liberals have to say about it. You can't repackage old bigotry and old biases and tell me that that's progress. So when we say stop liberal racism, it's about making sure we treat everybody fairly and equally on the basis of being a Canadian citizen. And
I know that you're also out there talking about young men, and I've heard some commentary that this is some weird far-right interest or cult thing. Down in the States, the biggest advocate of this is a guy named Scott Galloway, who is a progressive Democrat. This is an issue across North America. I'm not sure if it applies to other Western countries as well, but across North America, young men are... What was the name of the old movie? Failure to Launch? There's a lot of young men failing to launch. Why does that issue drive you?
Well, I'm of that demographic, or recently
You're still fairly young.
Recently was, yeah. I'm a recent graduate of young male status. But, no, I mean, look, I've written a book about this. This has been an interest of mine for over a decade now.
Yeah, I was going to say about 10 years.
Yeah, I've been seeing these issues, whether it's addiction, homelessness, unemployment, high school dropout rates, disproportionately affecting young men. And the reality is our federal government has a department called Women and Gender Equality that does not view the issues facing young men as part of gender equality. So we don't have a government that is looking at this. And as an MP, I want to bring the silenced and marginalized people to the forefront and make sure they're being heard by the government. And that's what this is about for me, making sure young men are not forgotten.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
I'll say this about the Conservative Convention. It should put to rest the idea of a divided party, the idea that there is some kind of revolt against Poilievre, his leadership, or his style. The man received almost 90% support with 95% of delegates voting. This is Pierre Poilievre's party. What happens next? Perhaps a spring election, maybe one in the fall. If either one of those happen, remember what I say about politics. Voters are fickle, polls can change, and campaigns matter. Full Comment is a post-media podcast. My name's Brian Lilley, your host. This episode was produced by Andre Prue. Theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libin is the executive producer. Please remember to hit subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. Leave a comment, share this on social media, and let your friends know about us. Thanks for listening. Until next time, I'm Brian Lilley.
Here's that clip from Canada Did What? I promised you. Imagine yourself inside a Boeing 767 operated by Air Canada. It's July 1983, you're traveling between Montreal and Edmonton, and a couple hours into the flight, the comforting roar of its two jet engines suddenly stop, and most of the power cuts out.
Good evening. It was a metric mix-up. Air Canada has confirmed the plane that landed at Gimli, Manitoba last Saturday ran out of gas because of an error in metric conversion.
I regret to inform you that you're inside the Gimli glider, one of history's only incidents of a civilian airliner running out of gas in the middle of the sky. And this happened because someone didn't know how to properly measure out enough jet fuel. Now, I mention the Gimli glider only to note that systems of measure are not just numbers on a page. They're cultural objects. They might not be on par with language or religion, but they're ways of understanding the world around us. And if you screw with them, even with the best of intentions, you might get the occasional airliner falling out of the sky. Fortunately, in this instance, it miraculously worked out fine. The pilots in control of this particular Air Canada flight just happened to be two of the only people on Earth perfectly suited to safely bring down a crippled full-size airliner in the middle of Manitoba. One of them was an experienced glider pilot. The other one was a former Royal Canadian Air Force pilot who just happened to have served at a Manitoba airbase that was now directly underneath them. If you want to hear the rest of the story, make sure you subscribe to Canada Did What everywhere you get your podcasts.